An official warm welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Nicole Chalet, and I'm the president of the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society, also known as the AHA Society. We're very pleased to have you with us this evening for our lecture. If you are not already, I invite you to join us as a subscriber to our mailing list, which you can do so at theahasociety.org. Before we officially begin and I introduce our speaker this evening, I do want to share the sad news with our friends and members here this evening of the recent passing of our dear friend and supporter of the AHA Society, Nancy Spanis. Through her writing, scholarship, and unwavering commitment to history and Hamilton, she left a real mark on all of us and on the history field. And we will be holding a special tribute in her honor in the coming weeks. But we do want to invite you on behalf of her husband to join, if you are in the Virginia area, her funeral service on Saturday, January 31st at 11 a.m. at the New Jerusalem Lutheran Church in Lovettsville, Virginia. I will share that information in the chat. And as her husband said, as the AHA Society was such an important part of her life, he does hope that members of the society could come and attend the event if you are in town. He also mentioned that it is fitting that the last post that Nancy ever made on her blog was the interview that she recently did with us at the fall, and that he's very happy that it is there and available for people to see. And that really means a lot to me personally and to all of us. So I do hope that you will join us back to honor both the wonderful talks that she gave and the wonderful person that she was. And we will be sharing more information about that, as this is just brand new news to all of us that we are processing. So I hate to share the sad news, but I know that many of you were her good friends, would also want to honor and remember her in this way. So I thank you for joining us this evening as well, and I hope you'll join us back to remember her. With that, I will shift to introducing our amazing speaker that we have this evening. We have a wonderful talk on Washington crossing the Delaware, the huge iconic painting depicting the pivotal moment that breathed new life into the Patriot cause on Christmas night in 1776. Our speaker, Elizabeth Kahn Kaplan, who is an independent historian and a docent at the museum that owns the painting, will explore not only the historical accuracies of the painting, but also some of the poetic license. And I know we're all very excited to hear about those facts tonight. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Nicole, for inviting me and for all the help I received from the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society, Sergio and Mariana Aller. I wish to extend my condolences to Nancy's husband. I know he's on this chat, and she was a wonderful woman. Now, on that not so cheerful note, I will begin the presentation. Well, this is the iconic painting that is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Many of you may have seen it in this gallery. It's a huge painting, 22 feet by 12 feet. Actually, the 6'2" George Washington is shown at his full height in the middle of the painting because it is 12 feet high. Here we have some military visitors who enjoyed seeing the painting. We could have had 3 or 4 more of them in front of it. It's a very huge painting on a huge topic. So today's presentation is going to follow a few points. I'm going to list my sources for information. I'm going to acknowledge Alexander Hamilton's role in 1776. I'm going to talk about the events leading up to the crossing. I'm going to talk about the crossing and the Battle of Trenton, the artist's purpose, and, who was in the boat with Washington, and criticisms of the artist's errors, the painting through the years other artists' interpretations of the painting and the painting today in a new frame. And Nicole, I want to minimize the side here. Okay, so here we go. Um, Talking about the sources of information, many of you may have seen recently the 6 episodes broadcast by PBS, 12 hours worth of information. It was episode 3 that lasted 2 hours, and 15 minutes was devoted to the crossing and the Battle of Trenton. David McCullough's 1776 book, uh, um, the title is 1776, he wrote it in 2005, 294 pages, all about that one year. 16 pages there devoted to the crossing of the Delaware River and the subsequent Battle of Trenton. But then we look at Washington's Crossing by David Hackett Fisher, 374 pages, all of which are devoted to the crossing of the Delaware River and the subsequent Battle of Trenton. If you wish any more information after my talk about this event, I recommend strongly that you get the book Washington's Crossing. You will know every detail of that event. In addition, I used this book, Alexander Hamilton, The Formative Years, by our good friend and member Michael E. Newton, because Alexander Hamilton did participate in the crossing, as you will learn. So here he is actually in the uniform of the New York Artillery. He formed that when he was at King's College, which is now Columbia University. He formed that in 1776, the early part. And then, um, sorry, on March 14th, 1776, the New York Pavilion, Congress's Committee for Safety, recommended Alexander Hamilton to be a captain of artillery, the New York Provincial Congress. In the summer of 76, Hamilton's artillery company was transferred into the Continental Army's Regiment of Artillery commanded by Henry Knox. The events in 76 leading up to the crossing. By August 15th, 76, almost 400 British ships were in New York Harbor with 32,000 British and Hessian soldiers. So imagine how you would have felt if you lived in Manhattan then and saw these ships and these soldiers coming ashore, coming to you. The first and largest battle of the American Revolution took place in Brooklyn on Western Long Island, August 27th to 29th in 1776. It's called either the Battle of Brooklyn, but most usually the Battle of Long Island. And it was a disaster for George Washington. He watched it from a distance and quailed as he saw his men running in terror from the Hessians and the British. This is a painting, The Battle of Long Island, showing that moment by Alonzo Chappell in 1860. Well, General Washington was not a great general. They will tell you that at West Point. He was a great leader. And what he did here was to save his army with help from an important man. Over the East River to Manhattan, were many boats that had been assembled by Washington in advance with Colonel John Glover. This is a pencil drawing by John Trumbull, a famous American artist who actually served in the Continental Army until 1777. Take a look at the badge that the Glover's Marblehead Regiment wore. The spirit lives, and the password, the catchword was liberty or death. And it was George Washington's idea to take that and modify it slightly for one of his own passwords, as we shall see. Well, this is the quick flight from Washington's army. I hope this map it will be legible to you. The red marks are the British. The blue bars are the Patriots escaping away through North Manhattan, heading toward Westchester County. There are battles along the way. There's a Battle of White Plains, which Hamilton participated in, a disastrous battle at Fort Washington, where 2,800 men were lost. And then across the Hudson River, again with John Glover's help of his Marblehead mariners rowing boats, Battle of Fort Washington was ended, and Fort Lee, New Jersey, was captured without a battle. Washington's army fled as the British came close to it. So this is not a good auspicious beginning to November and December. This is a retreat through New Jersey. The map of New Jersey here shows four rivers that are going to be crossed. The Hudson River, of course, which ends from New York into New Jersey. Hackensack River, Raritan River, Delaware River. The crossings, Hudson River from November 9th to 10th, November 20th, the Hackensack River, December 1st, the Raritan River, and then December 7th into Pennsylvania. At the Raritan River, the American artillery delayed the British long enough to prevent a crippling and possibly war-ending defeat. Hamilton participated in the battle. Quote, a spirited cannonade ensued across the river, in which our battery was served by Captain Alexander Hamilton, firing his cannon across the Raritan River at British and Hessians on the other side. In the fall of '76, New Jersey suffered two opposing armies marching through. British supplies were short. Soldiers were told to, quote, forage, unquote, for food and firewood. To the British and Hessians, foraging meant looting, pillaging, and worse. And it was common in New Jersey for men to make sure their daughters, their wives, their mothers never left the house because it was not safe from the ransacking and the raping of the Hessians and the British officers, too, I am sorry to say. Well, this is what the Continental Army's winter quarters looked like. This is from a sketch at Valley Forge, but it was exactly the same conditions on the Delaware River banks in December of '76. The men had to forage for their own wood, of course, lighting fires whenever they could, many of them wounded, many of them sick, many of them very hungry. Michael Newton wrote, these were dire times for the United States. The defeat on Long Island, the loss of New York City, the British capture of Fort Washington, and 2,800 American soldiers, and the retreat through New Jersey weighed on the morale of the Army and nation. The Army was about to disappear. Illness, desertions, and the terms of service for most soldiers would expire at the end of the year. Washington wrote to his brother on December 15th, quote, the game is pretty near up. He did not share this with anyone else. To Joseph Reed, his aide-de-camp, to attempt a stroke upon the forces of the enemy, a lucky blow, necessity, dire necessity nay, must justify an attack. On December 24th, the night before the crossing, Washington selected a secret password, victory or death, borrowing a little bit from John Glover. So Thomas Paine had followed with the army across New Jersey. He wrote The American Crisis. He was the author of Common Sense, a newspaper. Quote, these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Paine had written the words during the Army's retreat from New York. On Christmas Day, seeking to inspire his soldiers, General George Washington had Paine's words read out loud to his troops at McConkey's Ferry on the Delaware River. The Army's commanders read the words to a force that included John Marshall, who would become Chief Justice in the new government, Alexander Hamilton, who would become Secretary of the Treasury, James Monroe, who would eventually become a president himself, and Aaron Burr, who rose to vice president under John Adams. Early on Christmas morning, the women of the Army were hard at work with orders to prepare, quote, 3 days' rations ready cooked, quote. Don't be shocked. There were plenty of women and children who followed their husbands into the Army to take care of whatever they could. It was a practice of many armies to have wives and children aboard, which of course must have added to the complexities of the events. Here's a map that shows you what Washington had planned. On the northern part, Washington is with 2,400 soldiers at McConkey's Ferry. James Ewing farther south with 800 soldiers. John Cadwalader still farther south on the Delaware with 800 soldiers. His plan was to block any escape from Hessians over the Assunpink Creek. Well, didn't turn out that way. Well, 2,400, 800, 1,800 equals 5,000 men, and that's what Washington thought he would have when he got to Trenton. Crossing the Delaware 3 hours late. Why was it 3 hours late? A heavy snowstorm, frozen roads, having to move 18 cannon on wheels and 50 horses. Well, December 25th at 6 p.m., 3 hours late, the first boatloads of soldiers crossed the Delaware River at McConkey's Ferry with George Washington. December 26th at midnight, George Washington crosses and waits, and waits, and waits. By 3 a.m., the last boats cross. Making the crossing with 2,400 men, 18 cannon on wheels, and 50 horses. As to the others downstream, Generals James Ewing and John Cadwalader could not make it across due to the thickness of the loose ice floes. Washington did not know that he only had 2,400 men that would meet him at Trenton instead of 5,000. 12:15 a.m., December 26th, quote, "By this time the ice began to drive with such force and in such quantities as threatened many boats with absolute destruction." That's Colonel Joseph Reed, who was an aide-de-camp to Washington. The generals who made it, Major General John Sullivan crossed at McConkey's Ferry, so did Major General Nathaniel Greene, so did Major General Henry Knox. And these three generals were to lead the army down the march to Trenton with George Washington. Here's a map of the march. The long blue arrows is John Sullivan's group. General Greene's division broke off to the right of it at one point as they approached Trenton. And on the march to Trenton at 4 a.m., the entire column of men with horses, guns, and wagons stretched more than a mile. A Jersey man came out to see why his dogs were barking. When he realized he was talking to American troops, he brought them food and offered to join them. Quote, "I'm a doctor," he explained, "and I may be of help to some poor fellow." Dr. John Riker joined Monroe's Virginia Infantry as a surgeon volunteer. 4 hours later, at the Battle of Trenton, Monroe was hit by a musket ball that severed an artery. His life was saved by Dr. Riker, who clamped the artery just in time to keep him from bleeding to death. According to David Hackett Fisher, Captain Alexander Hamilton and the New York batteries brought 2 guns, those are cannon, into action on the high ground above Trenton. But according to Michael Newton, Hamilton was definitely with the army on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware. He is not sure if Hamilton made it across the river to Trenton. Hamilton might have been with the generals who did not make it, Ewing and Cadwalader. Although Fisher in Washington's Crossing writes that Hamilton participated in the battle, no written proof has been found that he and his artillery were with Henry Knox or Nathaniel Greene as they fired down King Street. This is a map, and if Hamilton had been with them, he would have been at number 1 at the bottom of the map, which was at the top of the hill with his cannon, and they would have fired those cannon down King Street and wiped out the Hessians that were assembling in a hurry. The Assunpink Bridge at the top was an escape route for Hessians, and it was supposed to be blocked by John Cadwalader and his and his troops, 1,200 troops, but they never made it across the ice. So some Hessians did escape there, and actually many of them blended into the countryside and eventually became good American citizens. And the ones who made it back to Germany came back with their wives and children because they thought this was a wonderful place to live. Hessians, 22 killed, 83 wounded, 918 prisoners. Americans, one officer and two privates wounded, plus two soldiers who froze to death on the march. The Americans captured soldiers, officers, and 25 officers' servants, plus muskets, bayonets, cartouche boxes, swords, 6 cannon, 15 flags, and Colonel Rahl's beloved hautbois. These are oboists. He loved music and had brought Hessians who could play the oboe with him. Well, this is a famous painting by John Trumbull, The Capture of the Hessians at Trenton. It's full of inaccuracies. Excuse me, it shows George Washington on his horse offering a hand to the wounded Rahl, who was wounded, of course, in the battle, and offering sanctuary. Actually, Rahl died in this house, Stacey Potts's house, and Hamilton and Knox visited him there and promised to take good care of the Hessian soldiers, and they did. Washington's policy was not to punish these prisoners. They marched them all the way down to Baltimore when the Hessians were the delight of the society there. Loyalists and the British preferred to think that Washington's army was victorious within 45 minutes because the Hessian mercenaries were hung over after a night of Christmas revelries. Quote, no evidence that on the morning of the attack, the Hessians were still reeling drunk or in a stupor from having celebrated Christmas in the Germanic manner. Excuse the typo there. Major James Wilkinson. And John Greenwood, a fifer who was with Washington's army throughout this event, I am willing to go upon oath that I did not see even a solitary drunken soldier belonging to the enemy. The Hessians were not drunk. They were probably exhausted because Rahl had them on alert. He told them to sleep in their uniforms with their weapons by their side, wearing their cartridge boxes with full rounds of ammunition at the ready. So now we have to recross the Delaware. The army is in Trenton. They want to get back to New Jersey, to Pennsylvania. Well, of course, this says December 25th to 26th, they went to New Jersey to attack the Hessian outpost. December 26th, they're back to Pennsylvania with 918 Hessian prisoners, plus all the soldiers and all the equipment. And then on December 29th to 31st, they're going to go back to New Jersey to march again on Trenton for another battle, and then Princeton. Why? George Washington thought this was a perfect opportunity now to get Cornwallis's army that was about to attack and wipe them out if he could. He wanted to take advantage of the gain that they had made. So this is a key moment and a plea to his men, December 31st, 1776. First, he spoke to them as a general, and nobody came forward to volunteer to enlist again. Then he spoke to them as a human being. My brave fellows, you have done all I asked you to do, and more than could be reasonably expected. But your country is at stake, your wives, your houses, and all that you hold dear. You have worn yourselves out with fatigues and hardships, but we know not how to spare you. If you will consent to stay 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you probably can never do under any other circumstances. He spoke to his men just as their enlistments were up. And gradually, one by one, a few of them, then more, and finally many stepped forward to say, all right, I'll stay with you, General Washington, for at least another month. There were follow-up victories in New Jersey, the Second Battle of Trenton, known as the Battle of Sunken Creek, and the Battle of Princeton, January 3rd, where artillery captain Alexander Hamilton played a decisive role. So here at Washington's Crossing in Pennsylvania is this plaque. Here Washington and his men braved ice and sleet Christmas night, 1776, to cross the Delaware and to surprise and defeat the Hessians at Trenton. The victory gave new life to the Patriot cause. And a quote, "It may be doubted whether so small a number of men ever employed so short a space of time with greater or more lasting results upon the history of the world." George Trevelyan, a British historian, 1903. Now let's talk about the artist's purpose. Here he is, Emanuel Gottfried Leutze, born Baden-Württemberg near Stuttgart, Germany in 1816. He died after great success in the United States in Washington, D.C. in 1868. His father, an anti-monarchist seeking political freedom, brought his family to America in 1825, first to Fredericksburg, Virginia, and then to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Emanuel Leutze was 9 years old. His father's ideals heavily influenced his subject matter as a painter. America represented freedom, liberty, and democracy to him. When he was 15, his father died. To support his family, he painted portraits. Recognizing his talent, patrons funded his study in Europe. In 1845, he was in Dusseldorf, renowned for its school of romantic history painting. His goal, like many others, success in America. So here the Kunstakademie, Dusseldorf, Germany, 19th century locus of German romantic painting, and a key training center for American artists because there was no good art school in America at that time. The school emphasized minute detail, exaggerations, and heroic compositions. In addition to Emanuel Leutze, other American artists studied there. William Stanley Hazeltine, Eastman Johnson, Richard Caton Woodville, George Caleb Bingham, and Worthington Woodridge, who was in the painting as George Washington. Albert Bierstadt was there beginning in 1853, learning techniques from Leutze, which heavily influenced his grand landscape of the American West, the Rocky Mountain Lanter's Peak. Revolutionary fervor in Germany, as part of the widespread European revolutions, significantly ignited and peaked in March 1848, driven by demands for liberal reforms, constitutional government, and German national unity, challenging the post-Napoleonic order and leading to the March revolutions across the German states. And here's a lithograph cheering revolutionaries in Berlin, March 19th, 1848, as Emanuel Leutze is considering what his topic is going to be for that painting that he's doing in Dusseldorf. Well, he chooses the event of Washington crossing the Delaware. Leutze believed that the anecdote in a history painting should convey one clear idea, and that it was this idea, rather than the event depicted, that would be the inspiration for the picture. In his own words, the clear idea in his conception is how glorious had been the course of freedom. The subject of this painting is the glory of the struggle for freedom. Leutze commemorates the pivotal moment on December 26, 1776, when the outcome for American independence from Great Britain hung in the balance. Leutze chose not to depict the moment of triumphant victory in the battle that was to come a few hours later. Rather, he chose to show Washington and his men in the midst of the journey, eyes on the prize, when the outcome was still uncertain and the future insecure. Who is in the boat with Washington? Well, we have James Monroe. He will become the fifth president of the United States. He's shown here as the flag bearer. Why? Well, he was certainly in the army. He certainly crossed with Washington. He may even have been in the boat. But frankly, there would not have been any flag at all in this blinding storm, blowing winds, shifting ice, etc. So why is it there? Leutze put it there as an indication of what was to come. An African American is in the boat, one of John Glover's Marblehead Mariners. Very hard to see. He is just to the right of Washington's arm on the left side of the picture. He's sitting down. There's a little red, no, there's a little red scarf on the man in front of him over his head, and you can see the red cuffs on his sleeve. He's wearing a uniform of the Continental Army as he's poling the ice away. And during the Civil War, the painting served to raise funds for the Union cause and the anti-slavery movement, entirely fitting in light of Leutze's ardent abolitionist sentiments, which are reflected in the presence of the black soldier whom he positioned in the boat next to Washington. Then there's a man with a beaded pouch, an Indian's pouch, a member of an indigenous group. Again, Leutze wanted to show in this boat representatives of every group that was here in America. Possibly a woman in the red blouse on. Many people look and say, that's a woman. Maybe, maybe not. An officer, a weary farmer with no uniform or real weapon, he's carrying a cudgel, and a wounded man with a hat on his head. These were in the boat. The American artist T. Thomas Worthington Whitridge posed for the body of George Washington. Why? Because Leutze, in his studio in Dusseldorf, complained that the Germans that he could get to model for him were all too short. Washington was 6 feet 2. And when Worthington Whitridge, a friend of his, a fellow artist, dropped into his studio, he commissioned him to be a model of Washington. What about the face of Washington? Well, the life mask of Washington is by Jean-Antoine Houdon, 1785. He did it when Washington was president, and so this is an older face than the face would have been in 1776. This is owned by the Morgan Library in New York. But Josiah Wedgwood made a cameo that sold like hotcakes after Houdon's 1785 life mask, and Emanuel Leutze had purchased this cameo, and you can see in the portrait that the profile is exact. Here is the total picture again. We can take a look at the men in the boats, the Marblehead Mariners oarsmen, the person in the front pushing the ice away with his foot and his pole. A struggle, for sure. So there are criticisms of the artist's, quote, errors, unquote. Criticism number one, the ice floes are impossibly large. Of Washington's three forces, you already know two were defeated by ice on the river, Generals Ewing and Cadwalader. The main stream was full of flat cakes of ice, which came down the river at surprising speed, spinning and turning in the whirls and eddies of the river. The force of the current, the sharpness of the frost, the darkness of the night, the ice during the operation, and a high wind rendered the passage of the river extremely difficult. Eyewitness Major James Wilkinson. Well, that river, the Delaware River at McConkey's Ferry Crossing, it's about 2 football fields wide, not terribly wide as rivers go. And if you've been visiting McConkey's Ferry or Washington's Crossing, Pennsylvania in the summertime, it may be a very placid little stream. But this was December and a storm, and it wasn't the least bit passable. Wrote Joseph Reed, the ice began to drive with such force and in such quantities as threatened many boats with absolute destruction. Criticism number 2, they're heading in the wrong direction. Well, that's true. If you look at the map this way, east on the right, west on the left, north and south. That's the usual position for a map. So New Jersey would be on the left and Pennsylvania would be on the right. I'm sorry, on the right and Pennsylvania on the left. But it was near 6 a.m. when they were approaching New Jersey from Pennsylvania. The first faint light of dawn was in the southeastern sky. Leutze wanted to have that rising dawn, the bright light behind Washington's head. The dawn of a new day is what it symbolizes. So he reversed the compass. South is at the top. You're looking at Florida. North is at the bottom. So Pennsylvania obviously is on the west, on the right here, and east to New Jersey. They are definitely going in the right direction. Criticism number 3, Washington would have not have been standing. Well, everyone would have been standing, as because of the water, ice, and slush at the bottom of the boat. Most of the men crossed the Delaware standing up. On a wet winter night, anyone who sat in the bottom of a Durham boat or ferry would have been sitting in ice water. Accounts of other Delaware crossings, men were ordered to jump up and down in several inches of watery slush to clear the ice from the boats and to keep from freezing. Criticism number 4, the boats are too light for their loads. A large flotilla of river craft, Durham boats, named after the Durham Iron Works, were used to carry bulk cargo, iron, grain, wood, and whiskey, on the Delaware River. Big double-ended boats from 30 or 40 feet long to 60 feet, flat-bottomed, high-sided, a shallow draft of only 24 to 30 inches, and a broad beam of 8 feet. They moved the infantry across the river. Jersey militia had rounded up the boats. In all conditions, the boats were very stable on the river. And this is a reenactment of the crossing from December 1999. Every year at Washington's crossing, they try to have a reenactment. Several of them in the past 2 decades have been canceled because of ice on the river. But you can see the length of a Durham boat, much longer than the one in the painting. So in that sense, perhaps there's justice to the criticism, but Leutze did not want to paint a 40-foot-long boat. Criticism number 5, there were no horses or artillery in the boats. Well, we can see the white horse in a boat, probably a Durham boat, behind a Washington's boat, Durham boat, and probably this is not true. Why? Because for the 50 frightened horses and 18 pieces of artillery, Durham boats were useless. Only a few big ferries could carry them. Delaware ferry boats were built to carry horses and wagons. These were best for the Army's horses, artillery, and ammunition wagons. So probably the horses and the cannon went on the ferry boats that were flat-bottomed and almost like large rafts. Another criticism, the flag is wrong, and this is absolutely true. The flag that would have been flown, if indeed there had been a flag flown, would have been the Grand Union flag of the United Colonies. This was the official flag of the Army until 1777, when Congress passed a law about the stars and stripes. Betsy Ross's flag was not in the consideration here. The painting through the years. Well, here it is, first rendition, 1849 to 1850, second, 1850 to 1851. What, you ask? A second version? Well, the one we have now is a replica. The first painting, begun in 1849, was partially destroyed in a fire in Leutze's studio in 1850, when he threw the burning painting out a window. The restored painting was sold by the insurance company to the Kunsthalle Bremen and was destroyed in a British Royal Air Force bombing raid on September 5, 1942, during World War II. And David Hackett Fisher, author of Washington's Crossing, said a witticism, it was probably Britain's return for having lost the revolution to us. A second version of the painting was commissioned by Emile Goupil Gallery, a Parisian art dealer, for his New York City gallery. The painting was first exhibited in 1851 in New York. 50,000 came to see it before it was shown in the Rotunda in Washington, D.C. Marshall O. Roberts, an industrialist, bought the canvas for the then enormous sum of $10,000, and I want to go back because I missed. It was exhibited in New York, October 29th, 1851 to February 28th, 1852. Henry James, age 8, who grew up to be a famous author, remembered the impression it made upon him for the rest of his life. In 1853, M. Knoedler and Company published an engraving of it. In 1897, John Stuart Kennedy, not a relative of the John Kennedy family, a trustee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, paid $16,000 for it and gifted it to the Met Museum. In Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi in 1883, he sarcastically commented on the ubiquitous prints of the painting by saying they were, quote, works of art which would have made Washington hesitate about crossing if he had known what advantage would be taken of it, unquote, referring to their widespread reproduction and adaptation for various purposes, making it a familiar, almost mundane image despite its historical significance. From 1952 to 1970, the painting was lent by the Met and displayed at Washington Crossing State Park in Pennsylvania. By one estimate, 250,000 people visited every year for a decade to view Leutz's handiwork. In 1969, the Met formally recalled its loan of the painting to the park and brought it back in time for the nation's bicentennial to grace the museum's American wing. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. And it's gracing the Metropolitan's American wing today for this special anniversary, too. Other artists' interpretations of the crossing. This painting in 1819, before Leutz's, The Passage of the Delaware by Thomas Sully from the Museum of Fine Arts. And you can look at it and say, yeah, good painting. Washington's on his white horse, few people in the background, no real boats to see. Crossing the Delaware by Edward Hicks, also before Leutz's painting in 1834. He did several versions of this one, rather dark and gloomy. After Leutz's painting, George Caleb Bingham, in 1856 until 71, when he finished this Washington Crossing the Delaware. Yes, Washington is on his white horse on the boat, and not so many people. This is a political cartoon, and there are several of them I'll be showing to you. General Rosalie Jones crossing the Delaware. Rosalie Jones was a suffragist. In 1912, she organized a march of women onto Albany to get the legislature to pass votes for women. And there is a banner being held by one of the women that says votes for women. And the boat is populated only with women, covered with blankets, looking none too happy, but she is standing in the general's position. Then this is kind of a very subtle criticism of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Grant Wood had been given a commission by the DAR in a western state to put up a monument to soldiers he wanted to use a stained glass that was going to be made by a German glassmaker. And the women objected to his using anybody from Germany. Remember, this is 1932. World War I was a disaster, of course, although we won it, and Germany was not a popular subject. So he thought that was pretty hypocritical. He put the painting, which you can see barely in the distance, by this German American behind the portraits of these three DAR ladies sipping from English teacups. Then this painting was unpopular with both blacks and whites, but it was a political statement necessary, according to Robert Colestott in 1975. George Washington Carver Crossing the Delaware, a page from an American history textbook. This is in the middle of the civil rights struggle, and they're not getting very far, apparently, definitely. And Robert Colescott put black General Washington and black soldiers and boatsmen in the boat. On the right is a banjo player, in the middle is a mammy cooking, on the left is a chef. It's all very politically incorrect, I would say, but in 1975, Robert Colescott, an African American himself, made this as a kind of a sarcastic comment on Washington crossing the Delaware. This one, Abandoned Ship, is really funny. Obama was president and there was a terrible economic disaster going on. Ben Bernanke is there holding the flag. And it's just a witty way of saying, get your act together, President Obama. You're crossing in difficult waters. Now, this is the last painting I know of that was made most recently by Mort Kunstler. Mort, I interviewed him, and he said he was going to make a painting that was exactly the way it was the night of December 26th, the morning of December 26th. So he decided that everybody was in these flat-bottom rafts with the cannon, and Washington standing there in his dark cloak in a pitch black sky. Well, it was Leutz's decision to make it a few hours later with dawn rising, and you can decide which you prefer. I saw this painting exhibited at the New York Historical Society when Mort Kunstler lent it to them for a week, and nobody wanted to spend any time looking at it. They took one look and walked away. Whereas I can tell you that when you're in the galleries where Washington Crossing the Delaware is by Leutze, people linger and stay for a long time. The painting today in a replica of the original frame. Well, what happened here? Matthew Brady took a photograph of the original, well, the replica of Leutze's painting when it was displayed in this frame in 1864 at a fundraiser for the Union soldiers. It was called the New York Sanitary Fair. Many paintings were shown and people paid to see them. Well, a curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was doing research at the New York Historical Society, and he found this photograph from Matthew Brady, who, of course, was famous for photographing the Civil War during this time. So the Met decided that was the original frame. Let's make a copy of it. So they hired Eli Wilner and Company in New York City and got to work making the frame exactly as it was when Leutze had it in New York City. There's this wonderful eagle holding a banner that has words written upon it. I'll show it to you in a minute. This is the frame today at the Met. And what does it say on that banner? First in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. A quote from General Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee of Virginia, December 1799, at the funeral of George Washington, who had died a week earlier. And that is my talk to you. And now I welcome very much any questions that you have. Nicole?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. That was just wonderful, and we're so grateful to you to give this presentation to us and bring to life not only this kind of iconic painting, but some of the stories behind it, some that I had never heard. So really, really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
did have a pretty active chat. I did have a question for you. Another criticism that I had heard, and I believe I had heard this at the Met, is um, that the river was not actually the Delaware, that it was too wide, and that the artist had used the Danube as inspiration, and that the landscape didn't match. I was wondering if you knew anything about
Well,
that.
of course, he was painting it in Germany, but this is a man who grew up in Philadelphia, not very far from the Delaware River. And I suspect that he had a very good image in his mind, certainly no camera picture of it. But was he using the Danube? Other people say it was the Rhine. Other people say it was the Rhone.
Mm.
So we may never know. I have not read anything that says definitely what was his inspiration for the river. But he certainly knew the Delaware River because he lived fairly close.
And that I did not know previously, so that was very interesting to read. And so I think that adds a lot of credence to the fact that if he did, it was for a creative license to add more of the
Well,
romantic
poetic
drama.
license or inspiration, of course.
Exactly. So I will check the chat for questions. We did have a few comments here and there. Michael Newton commented that when the AHA Society went to Trenton in January a few years ago for an event, that the ice flows looked remarkably like those in the painting. So if anything, that adds credence to the fact that he did remember from his childhood
Thank you,
what it looked
Michael.
like.
They, as I mentioned, they have had to cancel the crossing reenactments several times.
Yes, and there was a comment here about you mentioned the man with the beaded pouch. So he's saying that the historian of his genealogical society for 30 years have researched and claimed that the man with the beaded pouch is Jacob Duffer III, whose mother was a Lenape Lenni Indian maiden named Elizabeth, who married Jacob Duffer Jr., whose
I
father and other families settled German Valley, New York. This historian died at the age of 84. Where can I find information on his claim? Not that I expect that you know this information, but I'm curious if you have any
Well,
knowledge
first
about
of
what he
all,
is
I
speaking
am
about.
grateful for that information. And if you have my email address, and I think everybody does, but if you'll put that in the chat, I would love
Absolutely
to be in touch with this person very much. Yeah.
fantastic. I really loved, Elizabeth, how you showed the inspiration of Washington crossing the Delaware on other pictures, as well as some of the earlier pictures. That was really fascinating to see. We did have Robert comment that there is another painting. Are you familiar with the George Harding painting?
I'm not
Uh,
familiar with that, but I'll certainly look it up. But I'm sure there are many
Great,
others. I just
and
saw Tom.
he does include a link to it. So thank you, Robert, and that it will be on display
Mhm.
in the as part of the new visitor center in 2026 this year at Washington's Crossing.
Excellent. I just saw a glimpse of Michael's note in the chat about was there a person from every state in the painting, and as far as I know, that has not been proven. Leutzer did want to represent different groups that were here, but whether he could find somebody that looked like he came from Massachusetts or Virginia or South Carolina, that's something else again.
Or maybe just the representation of 13 or the 13 colonies, perhaps. That's really interesting. And Karen comments, I don't know if you've seen Elizabeth, that Saturday Night Live last year had a really great sketch on Washington crossing the Delaware,
Hmm.
featuring the comedian Nate Bargatze. So if you
Yeah.
haven't seen that, I'll send that
It's
to
an
you. So,
easy image to adapt to any cause, which is probably one of the reasons why people take it for granted. You know, we've seen too many images misused of that painting.
well, I'm definitely one of those people that you mentioned that can just sit in the American wing and look up at the painting for a long time, even just to admire the frame. I'm glad that you talked about the recreation of the frame because even that just blows my mind of the artistry and the craftsmanship that
Yeah.
goes into the frame itself.
Yeah.
Um, we did have a question from Eric that he thought, well, you mentioned about Monroe. He had thought that Monroe came to Trenton from a different route. Do you have any more information about that?
The best I can say is that he was with Knox. Wait. No. What did I say? I'm not sure at this point whether he was with Green. I think he was with Green. But Michael Newton, are you there? Can you verify?
We'll see if Michael lets us know in the chat or if he wants
No,
to.
okay.
Um,
Good question. I'll look it up because I don't recall offhand. I'm sorry. But Monroe was definitely there. There's no doubt.
Great. And Lynn also is sharing the information about the calendar. Michael says he doesn't know about Monroe, but you can learn more at American Revolution at 250.com about the calendar for Lynn. And Eric added, no, Monroe was shot west of Trenton, but not crossing the Delaware. So maybe that happened at a different sequence
Monroe
of
was shot
events.
at the battle, not on the Pennsylvania side, but in New Jersey.
Right. All right, wonderful. Well, the fact that so many people want to get in touch with you, Elizabeth, I think is a wonderful indication of how fantastic your talk was this evening, and we're so grateful to present it to us. And I hope you all will keep in touch with us, keep following Elizabeth. You have her email now 3 times over to stay in touch with her. And we hope you will join us again on March 4th for our next talk with Molly Beer. And please make sure that you're signed up for the AHA Society contact list, and we will send out more information about our dear friend Nancy Spanis. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you again, Elizabeth, and I wish
It's
you all
my
a wonderful
pleasure.
evening.
My pleasure.
Take care.
All good luck to everybody.